Tedjo stared at his laptop screen. His brow furrowed. A new email had just arrived in his inbox. No clear sender name. Just a string of random numbers as the address, and a subject line that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. Harvest Festival at Mount Kendil Village, Saturday, Clewen. The body of the email was short, but enough to spark his curiosity. Join our final celebration before the next season. Tedjo read it several times, making sure he wasn't misreading. No attachments, no phone number, no details other than an address written at the bottom. Mount Kendil Village, Tawang District, Central Java. Tedjo was a freelance journalist for a cultural magazine. He'd covered countless local rituals and traditional ceremonies all over the archipelago from Sabang to Flores. But this village, he'd never heard of it before. Mount Kendil. He didn't even recall any mountain by that name in Central Java. He pulled up a digital map on his laptop. Typing the name of the village into the search bar, nothing came up. He switched to a paper map he kept on his bookshelf, carefully scanning every tiny dot in the Tawang area and beyond. Still nothing that afternoon. Tedjo called an old acquaintance at the local tourism office. The man, a grizzled civil servant named Dammer, sounded confused when Tedjo mentioned the village's name. Mount Kendil, Dammer repeated, his voice quiet. That place. I thought it was gone back when I was a boy. It was a bustling little village, but they said it was buried by a landslide decades ago. The people, well, they were never found, but I just got an invitation to their harvest festival. Tedjo replied, trying to mask the doubt in his voice. On the other end of the line, there was a long silence. Dammer's breathing grew heavy before he finally spoke. If that's true, just be careful, son. I myself would never dare set foot there at night. The call ended without further explanation. Now, Tedjo sat in silence at his desk. The sun was slipping below the buildings outside, leaving a pale orange glow in the sky. The email remained open on his screen. That address seemed to be taunting him to come, and somehow his curiosity only grew stronger. That same night, Tedjo began to pack. His camera, notebook, flashlight, spare batteries, all his usual gear. Saturday, Clewen was just 2 nights away, and he had already made up his mind. Tomorrow, he would leave for Tawang, headed for a village that didn't even exist on any map. Saturday morning arrived with a heavy gray sky over Tawang. Tedjo stepped off the train at a small rural station, its cracked walls and rusted tin roof looking like they hadn't been touched in decades. Only a few other passengers got off, mostly farmers and street vendors, and they quickly disappeared into the streets. Tedjo stood on the platform for a moment, scanning the sleepy town. It felt like a place trapped in time. Narrow, dusty roads, wooden houses leaning under their own weight, and fields of rice starting to turn golden in the breeze. But what unsettled him the most were the glances he kept catching. People looked at him oddly, as if they already knew where he was going. A middle-aged motorcycle taxi driver approached him, wearing a faded jacket and a wary expression. When Tedjo gave him the address, Mount Kendil Village, the man froze. Then, after a long silence, he finally nodded. It's expensive, sir. The road is long, empty. Most folks have forgotten how to get there. He said flatly. Tedjo didn't argue, handing over the money without complaint. The motorbike roared to life, and they left the station, at first riding down smooth asphalt streets. But soon the pavement gave way to bumpy gravel, then to a narrow dirt path that wound up through dense, dark forest. Tedjo checked his watch. It was still only 9 in the morning, yet the thick canopy overhead already made it feel like twilight. The air grew damp and cold every so often. Wisps of pale fog drifted across the path, curling around the tires as they passed. No houses, no voices, just the engine's buzz and the occasional crunch of dry leaves underfoot. Tedjo couldn't help but wonder if anyone actually lived beyond this place anymore. The road felt like it had been abandoned for years in some spots, Wild grass and thorny bushes reached across the path as if trying to erase it entirely. Eventually, they passed a rotting wooden sign half buried in weeds, its paint almost illegible. Mount Kendil 2 kilometers. It was the only proof he had that they were still on the right path. The motorbike stopped suddenly at the edge of a rickety wooden bridge. Below, a sluggish brown river drifted by. The driver glanced over his shoulder, his face expressionless. "This is as far as I go, sir," he said. "Why?" Tedjo asked. The man shook his head slowly. "Nobody from here crosses that bridge anymore. Not in years." Before Tedjo could say another word, the driver turned the bike around and rode off, leaving only the fading growl of his engine behind. Now alone, Tedjo stood at the foot of the bridge, staring at the dirt road on the other side as it climbed deeper into the forest. A chill ran through him from somewhere beyond the trees. He thought he heard something, a faint melody drifting through the air, like the sound of a gamelan, slow, heavy, and far, far away. Tedjo tightened the straps on his backpack, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the creaking wooden planks, one foot after the other. He crossed into the unknown, heading down a road nobody dared to take anymore. Tedjo's footsteps echoed softly as he crossed the wooden bridge. The planks creaked under his weight, and the river below seemed to hold its breath silent, unmoving, its surface like murky glass on the far side. The air grew colder, the trees closed in tighter, their gnarled branches arching overhead like blackened claws. Even the birds had stopped singing. But the faint gamelan music persisted. Sometimes it faded to nothing, then returned louder, as though the forest itself was breathing the melody in and out. Tedjo kept walking, his boots crunching over gravel and fallen leaves. The narrow path climbed higher, twisting through ancient trees with trunks so thick it would take 3 people to wrap their arms around one. The air smelled of damp earth and moss. And then he saw it. At the crest of the path stood a gate. It was made of weathered black stone, nearly swallowed by ivy and creeping vines. The pillars leaned slightly toward each other, and strange, faded carvings adorned their surfaces, worn into shapes Tedjo couldn't quite recognize. Above it hung a rotting wooden sign, "Welcome to Mount Kendil Village." The letters were faint, the wood riddled with cracks. Tedjo stopped just a few steps from the gate, his pulse quickening. There was no one around, no sound but the whisper of the wind and that distant, mournful gamelan. Then, with a long, low creak, the small wooden door in the middle of the gate slowly swung open by itself. Tedjo froze, his breath catching in his chest. The forest beyond the gate was darker, the path narrowing into a tunnel of trees that slopped down into a misty hollow. From down there, he could see faint rooftops, wisps of smoke curling up, and tiny colorful flags strung between wooden poles. A village, alive. He glanced back at the bridge, now hidden by the trees and fog behind him. Then back to the gate. The air smelled faintly sweet now, like incense. And still, the music played, louder than before, a slow, solemn rhythm that beckoned him forward. Tedjo adjusted his backpack straps, swallowed hard, and stepped through the gate. The stone felt icy as he brushed past on the other side. The world felt different. The wind died. The forest fell completely still, and the gamelan was now so close, it seemed to echo inside his skull. The path widened slightly, and the outlines of the village below became clearer. He could see people moving between the houses, men and women in traditional Javanese dress, carrying baskets of flowers, hanging flags, and sweeping the packed dirt streets. The sight filled him with a strange mix of relief and unease. Relief, because the village was real, and unease, because something about the way they moved, slow, deliberate, and utterly silent, made his skin crawl. One by one, the villagers began to notice him. They looked up from their tasks. They smiled faintly as he passed, but their smiles never reached their eyes. Those eyes were too dark, too deep. Tedjo forced himself to keep walking. feeling dozens of silent stares follow him as he made his way down toward the square. And waiting at the end of the path was an old woman. She stood motionless, wearing a white kebaya with a blood-red sash draped over one shoulder. Her silver hair was pulled back into a tight bun, her face lined with so many wrinkles it looked carved from wood. She smiled at Tedjo as though she'd been expecting him all along when he stopped in front of her. She spoke in a soft, eerie voice that somehow carried through the square. "At last, young man, we've been waiting for you. The festival is about to begin." Tedjo swallowed hard, his chest tightening, and could only stare back at her, his body suddenly heavy with a sense of foreboding. The old woman turned without another word and gestured for Tedjo to follow her. Her bare feet glided over the packed dirt, as though she weighed nothing at all. Tedjo hesitated only a moment before trailing behind her, the quiet stares of the villagers still clinging to him like cobwebs. Everywhere he looked, there were signs of celebration. Long chains of flowers strung across wooden poles, oil lamps flickering even though it was still daylight, tables covered in vibrant batik cloth. And yet, the air felt wrong. There was no laughter, no chatter. Even the children who darted between houses never made a sound, their faces expressionless as they carried baskets of rice and flowers. They arrived at a wide, open square in the center of the village. Here, a long bamboo platform stood, decorated with offerings. Bowls of fruit and vegetables, roasted chickens, piles of sticky rice molded into intricate shapes. The sweet, smoky smell of incense hung thick in the air, but mixed into it was another odor, metallic, faint but sharp, that made Tedjo's stomach turn. At the far end of the square stood a stage, flanked by two enormous umbrellas of black and red. In the middle of the stage, a single chair sat atop a woven mat. A young man was already bound to it. His hands and feet were tied with coarse rope, and his mouth was gagged with a strip of white cloth. His head hung low, his chest heaving in shallow, panicked breaths. Tedjo froze where he stood, his eyes locked on the figure in the chair. No one around him seemed to think this was strange. The villagers moved about in perfect silence, arranging more offerings and lighting more candles as if nothing was out of place. The old woman climbed onto the stage. She turned to face Tedjo and raised her hand in a graceful arc. The square fell still. Even the faint gamelan music seemed to stop. "We are honored you have come to witness our final harvest," she said, her voice rising above the silence. "It has been many years since we last welcomed an outsider. You'll bring balance." Tedjo's heart thudded in his chest. "What is this?" he managed to say, his voice cracking. "Why is he tied up? What are you going to do to him?" The old woman's lips curled into a faint smile. "You'll see," she said softly, "and when it's done, you will understand." She turned her back to him and picked up something from the mat. A ceremonial dagger, its blade curved and glinting despite the muted light. Its hilt was wrapped in red and gold thread, but dark stains that looked like they'd never truly been cleaned marred the steel. A low hum began to rise from the villagers surrounding the square, a deep, guttural chant in a language Tedjo didn't recognize. One by one, they began to sway, their dark eyes glinting as the old woman raised the dagger high. Tedjo's breath quickened, his whole body screaming at him to run, but he couldn't move. The sound of the chant pressed against him, like a physical weight. His legs rooted to the ground, and his chest tightened further when he realized the bound man on the chair had lifted his head and was staring at Tedjo directly. The young man's eyes were wide, wild, full of desperate terror, as though silently pleading for Tedjo to do something, to stop it. The chanting reached a fever pitch. Tedjo's ears rang with the sound, his heartbeat hammering in time with the rhythm of the crowd. Every villager's head was tilted back, their lips moving in unison, their dark eyes glinting with a strange hunger. On the stage, the young man in the chair struggled violently now. His muffled screams fought through the gag as the old woman raised the dagger even higher, her thin arms trembling not with weakness, but with anticipation. and then she struck. The blade plunged deep into the young man's chest. His body arched as a final. Choked cry slipped from his throat. For a moment, the square went completely silent. Even the birds in the trees seemed to vanish. Tedjo watched in frozen horror as thick, dark blood began to spill from the wound, but it wasn't like any blood he'd ever seen. It was darker, almost black. And it moved strangely, pooling in patterns on the bamboo mat beneath the chair, snaking toward the edges of the stage as though alive. The old woman stepped back and allowed the blood to flow. It spread across the stage, dripping through the cracks in the wood. But instead of forming puddles beneath the platform, the earth below seemed to drink it. The soil darkened, slick and glistening, and then began to pulse faintly, as though something beneath it had just been fed. The villagers dropped to their knees in perfect unison and bowed low, their chanting now reduced to a low murmur. Tedjo stumbled backward, his breath ragged, his mind reeling. What is this? He whispered to himself. The old woman turned to him then, her eyes locking onto his. There was no kindness in her smile now, only cold satisfaction. This is what keeps us alive, she said evenly. Our harvest is not just for the fields, but for the earth itself. It hungers just as we do. Tedjo shook his head, disbelief twisting his gut. You killed him, you murdered. No, she interrupted, her voice sharp. We fed him to what sustains us. You, of all people, should understand. Every story has its price. And now, so do you. The villagers slowly rose to their feet, their gaze turning on Tedjo all at once. Their eyes gleamed darker than before, their smiles wider, their silent steps closing in around him. The hum began again, low and insistent. Tedjo's breath caught in his throat. He took a step back, then another, but the circle tightened around him. The old woman descended the stage and moved closer, her dagger still dripping black onto the ground. She tilted her head, studying him like a hawk studies prey. You've seen too much to simply walk away, she whispered, and the earth is still hungry. Tedjo's mind raced, his chest heaving as he searched for a way out. But all he saw were those eyes, hundreds of them staring at him, like a pack of wolves ready to tear into him. And in that moment, he realized he was next. The chanting grew louder. The ground beneath his feet seemed to warm, then throbbed faintly, as though eager to taste his blood. Tedjo clenched his fists, forcing himself to stand his ground, even as every instinct screamed at him to run. And through the chaos in his mind, one thought surfaced, sharp and clear. I can't let them take me. I have to get out. I have to tell someone what happens here, before they take me, too. But as the villagers closed in, their shadows merging into one, Tedjo felt the earth begin to pull at his feet, and all around him, the whispers began. Next, next, next. The whispers swirled all around Tedjo, chilling him to his bones. Next, next, next. It was as if the very earth beneath him was chanting along with the villagers, a dark and ancient hunger calling his name. The crowd pressed closer, their faces slack yet expectant, their eyes two black abysses that reflected nothing back. The old woman stood in front of him now, the dagger in her hand glinting wet and red in the torchlight. She raised it between them and spoke softly, almost tenderly. The earth has chosen you, accept it, and you will belong here forever. Something deep inside Tedjo snapped. A surge of defiance cut through his fear like lightning. No, he wasn't going to die in this cursed place. Not here, not like this. Without warning, he lashed out, kicking over one of the offering tables beside him. Baskets of rice and flowers tumbled to the ground, scattering into the dark soil. The villagers gasped and froze, their chant faltering for the first time since he arrived. The music stopped completely. Tedjo didn't wait. He spun around and ran. The earth beneath his feet groaned and shifted, but he didn't stop to look back. He darted through the stunned crowd, shoving past grasping hands and weaving between the silent, staring children. The whispers turned into shrieks now, angry and wild. But still he ran. The gate, He had to reach the gate. The forest path twisted before him, black vines clawing at his clothes as he sprinted through the oppressive dark. Behind him, the sound of feet pounding the dirt gave chase dozens, maybe hundreds, the entire village screaming his name as they came for him. Tedjo, Tedjo, Tedjo. His lungs burned, his legs screamed, but the faint silhouette of the stone gate finally emerged through the mist. It stood crooked and waiting at the top of the hill like salvation itself. With one last burst of strength, Tedjo lunged through it, and everything stopped. The air went still, the whispers fell silent, and when he stumbled to the other side and collapsed, the gate was gone, only a wall of silent. Black trees stood behind him now, swaying gently in the wind. Tedjo lay there, gasping, staring at the stars above. It was over. He was alive, but he could still feel the weight of their eyes in the back of his mind, and faintly, barely more than a breath, he thought he could still hear the gamelan in the distance, playing just for him. 3 days later, in the crowded cafe of a busy town, Tedjo sat hunched over a notebook. A group of locals sat around him, leaning in with wide, uneasy eyes as he spoke. His voice was hoarse, but steady. "I went there," he told them. "I saw them, and I made it back to tell you. Don't go looking for that village, not ever. If you hear the music, don't follow it, just don't." They sat in silence as he finished his story, no one daring to speak. Tedjo closed his notebook, staring out the window toward the distant hills, because deep inside, he knew the earth was still hungry, and someday it would call for him again.